What if the greatest battle you ever face isn't against an enemy, but against the darkness within yourself? Aria has the power to change everything, but only if she can control the war raging inside her. Will she embrace the light of her destiny, or will the shadows consume her? The fate of the packs lies in her hands, and the clock is ticking. Aria had always been there, but ignored, like the calm wind in a storm. The village, surrounded by dense forests and foggy hills, had a typical way of life. As the seasons and the sun changed, so did the days. On the night of her 16th birthday, however, everything changed. A dream was the first step. In a glittering moonlit forest, she stood barefoot. Her name was whispered by the trees. A set of golden eyes observed her from somewhere in the shadows. Just presence, neither beast nor human. The dream erupted into flames as a deep snarl ensued. Trees fell and cracked. Smoke filled the air. The moon then gazed from above, attentive, but not with light. Sweat clung to Aria's skin when she woke up, gasping. Her heart pounded like a war drum. She initially brushed it off, only a dream. However, it returned, and once more. Every night is more realistic and vivid. Then she saw it on the inside of her wrist. On the fourth morning, a faint crescent moon-shaped silvery mark. Thinking it was dirt or a trick of the light, she rubbed at it. It did not, however, fade. Rather, the mark became more distinct every day and glowed faintly with each rising moon. She felt panic claw at her. She kept it a secret from Mira, her best friend, and her mother. Could she? She didn't even comprehend it. Unusual events started to occur. Animals, including ravens, deer, and foxes, stopped when they noticed her and stared at her with eerie composure. Now, her dreams began to permeate her reality. She would hear whispers that faded with the wind or smell the aroma of burning wood on the breeze. While she slept, the golden eyes followed her around, blinking slowly at times and warningly at others. Attracted by an unseen force, Aria ventured into the forest one evening. Her wrist mark pulsed hotly. Everything was painted a gentle silver by the moonlight that flowed through the trees. The world grew quieter as she descended farther, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then she noticed it. She was unaware of the existence of a clearing. An old stone circle, partially obscured by moss and the passage of time, stood in the middle. Because there was a pool of water in the middle, it perfectly reflected the sky. The symbol on her wrist flared as she moved closer, burning brightly beneath her flesh. Her veins were flooded with pain and strength. She collapsed on the ground. The atmosphere changed. A towering figure, shrouded in shade and starlight, emerged from the trees. It had gold eyes. It echoed in her bones. "You are waking," it murmured. "The mark reveals what sleeps within." Whispering, "I don't understand," Aria said. "Yule, the fire, the moon, the eyes. Visions are not what they seem. They are recollections of who you were and who you need to grow into." Something in her, an old part long forgotten, held fast when she wanted to scream and run. Her dreams instantly made sense when the golden eyes met hers. There was no devastation in the blazing forest. It was a new beginning. There was no moon to observe. It served as guidance. The entity declared, "You are the last of the Watchers, situated on the moon, defender of the harmony between the visible and invisible." The mark on Aria's wrist, which was suddenly gleaming like moonfire, caught her attention. Her entire universe had shifted. She was more than a simple rural girl. She was more than that. Something more ancient, something strong. Aria remained alone in the clearing, no longer fearful, as the figure disappeared into the mist. The awakening was underway. The howls broke the silence of Aria's village just as the sun had begun to set. From the far hills came a deep, guttural sound that sent moms holding their infants tight and swarms of birds soaring into the air. Farmers let their tools fall. Elders whispered old prayers. Every soul already knew his name, therefore no one had to utter it. It was Cale Thorn, the Shatterclaw Pack's alpha, whose name was uttered with awe and fear, was more myth than reality. He was supposed to have ruthlessly and precisely dominated the northern woodlands, with his adversaries reduced to murmurs and his wolves unreasonably devoted. He was no longer a far-off storm, though. He was present within their village. As horses appeared from the tree line, Aria stood on the edge of the gathering, her heart oddly at ease. Sweat and shadows made the flanks of the horses slippery as they pawed the ground. A man in the center, tall and broad-shouldered and clothed in power that pulsed like fire heat, was flanked by warriors dressed in black leather. Thorn, Kyle, like a predator scouting prey, his brilliant, keen eyes scanned the area. Cale's eyes met hers once again. "You," he said, making more of a statement than a query. Aria gasped, not in terror, but in recognition, as though she had been silently waiting for this moment, for this man, her entire life. "My name is Aria," she said steadily, "and the mark is on me." There were murmurs. While some residents gazed at her in amazement, others did so in terror. However, Cale continued to advance, each step laden with power and a darker element, destiny. Even his whispered words, "There are forces awakening, Aria," were powerful. "This place is not safe for you. You were never intended to be concealed." With her chin raised, she said, "And you? What are you looking for from me?" Something between a growl and a smirk formed on his lips. "To keep you safe, to instruct you, to demonstrate the true meaning of the mark. The secret to what happens next is you." Despite her heart pounding in her chest, she didn't flinch. "What if I say no?" His voice was low as he leaned in. "You won't." The smell of rain and something wilder, like the midnight forest, filled the air when the wind changed. Ancient and vibrant, Aria felt it snake around her. She knew deep down that her calm life was finished. The world was evolving, and the focal point of it was her. Kyle held out his hand as he turned to go. "Ariana, come with me, or wait for the others to arrive and watch your village burn." There was silence. Slowly, she moved nearer and grasped his hand. The Alpha was here, and the mark-wearing girl had made a decision. The storm was barely getting started. The space where the pack had assembled was covered with silver shadows as the moon hung low over the woodland. Their gazes shifted between Aria, the outlaw who walked with defiance in her eyes and fire in her veins, and Coil, the Alpha whose name bore weight like thunder. Kyle's voice was quiet, but laden with authority as he stood upright, his muscles taut under his black shirt. "I declare Aria of the Wildwood to be my fated mate in accordance with werewolf law." The crowd echoed with gasps. However, Aria, she didn't recoil. Without showing any signs of fear, her eyes, which were the color of searing amber, met his. With a voice as keen as a sword, she declared, "I am no one's possession. I will not be bound by any fated bond." The ensuing quiet splintered like lightning. Kyle's mouth clenched. He hadn't anticipated her giving in so quickly, but he hadn't anticipated this either. The term fated would make most people bow down. It was holy, unchangeable, binding. Aria, however, appeared to have been disputed rather than claimed as she stood there. "You reject the bond?" he inquired, taking a step forward. With her chin up, she declared, "I deny being owned. Let this link develop if it is genuine. Tradition won't drag me like a collar around my neck." Once more, the wolves whispered, some in astonishment and others in appreciation. Kyle felt his inner beast awaken. It was attracted to her fire, but it disliked being questioned. Aria exuded risk, freedom, and defiance in every way. The pull was further heightened by her reluctance. He spoke softly and said, "You're brave." "Or stupid." Aria grinned. "Both. However, I am largely free." Like a tiger assessing his prey, Coil circled her, but Aria remained motionless. She did a good job of hiding her fear. A bewildering mixture of anger and something else throbbed in her heart. She sensed the connection as well. Every time he was close, it blazed in her blood, an ancient and wild relationship that is beyond reasoning. However, she refused to let it carry her away. She murmured, her eyes fluttering with emotion, "I won't fight the bond, but I also refuse to give up." Kale's eyes briefly flashed with respect. He had claimed her in accordance with the law, but he now understood that it was more than that. It was a matter of decision regarding her. Finally, he remarked in a low voice, "I don't want a mate who kneels. I want someone to be by my side." Astonished, Aria blinked. His remarks made a little but noticeable dent in the wall she had constructed. Then she continued, "Earn your spot next to me." Kale took a step back and let her go. With the fury of a queen in her stride, Aria strode through the crowd, her head high and her spine straight. She hadn't broken the tie, but she hadn't given in either. Because of this, she was more seductive and dangerous than any woman Kale had ever encountered. Their narrative would not be one of acquiescence. It would involve storms and sparks, as well as two wolves battling fate and spotting one another in the rubble. "Let the game begin," Kyle said into the darkness as Aria vanished into the trees. "Do you want me to make this into a series or add additional tension and introspection?" Aria felt different all the time. She felt alienated even in her pack, where magic and instinct throbbed in every heartbeat. Despite its might, her wolf didn't always react the same way as others. Her dreams were more vivid, almost prophetic, and her senses were keener. For years, she thought it was just because she was the daughter of Isolde, the late Luna, a legend whose grace and strength were still praised in whispers. However, there had always been silences, murmurs, and unspoken things. Until her 18th birthday night, the moon was exceptionally low, illuminating the treetops with silver fire as Aria ventured into the forest, drawn by an unexplainable attraction. It was anticipation, not dread, that made her chest hurt. A tiny ancient ruin, neglected and overgrown, waited for her deep in the forest. As she moved closer, she heard a voice echoing in her head as the air pulsed around it. "Daughter of two races, the time has come." A rush of vitality struck her chest, her heart thumping, vision blurry. She fell. Her eyes flickered to memories other than her own. Her mother standing tall in combat, a man shrouded in darkness, eyes blazing, a child her swaddled in silk held between them. An elderly woman was sitting next to her when she woke up, wise, wrinkled, and strangely familiar. Whispering, "You've seen the truth," the woman said. You're not the only one with wolf blood in your veins. There was something older about your father. Wilder. Aria gazed. What do you mean? The woman said, a shadowborn, her voice just above the breeze. Your mother made an effort to shield you from that reality. She thought she could tame him with love. His kind of darkness, however, cannot be contained. The equilibrium changed when you were born. What neither side could have on its own, power unaffected by loyalty, is in your bloodline. Aria gasped for air. A shadowborn. Monsters exclusively found in myths. Monstrous beings created from chaos itself. Her whole life had been a deception if it were true. The woman got up and gave Aria a pendant. To protect you, your mother bound your abilities. However, they are now waking. You have to decide who you want to be. Aria gazed at the pendant, which had a black gemstone interwoven with a crescent moon. It hummed on her flesh. Her name appeared to be whispered by the trees as the woodland curved around her. She was plagued by images for the next few days. Both bloodlines' voices cried out. Her inner wolf pleaded for honor, togetherness, and allegiance. The shadow mumbled chaos, strength, and freedom. Two worlds separated Aria, and neither would fully embrace her. But maybe she wasn't supposed to make a decision. She went back to the ruins in the middle of night. She held the pendant to her chest under the full moon. Her body shimmered with darkness and silver, and pain ripped through her. Her cry, which was something strange and not quite wolf or shadow, shattered the sky. Something bigger. She carried unrealized potential and the history of a forbidden union. She is a force unto herself, not only a link between two old forces. She would frighten the pack. She would be targeted by the Shadowborn. Aria, however, had left hiding. She was done playing the part of someone she wasn't. She was shadow-forged, Luna-born Aria, and her name would be remembered by everyone. Kale was a silent shadow among the Watchers, warriors confined by duty and devoid of any desire, in a realm where emotions were governed by the law and love was a perilous indulgence. Aria, however, was a dreamseer, born in the secret valleys of Elira, where emotions held power and dreams spoke truths. They never intended to impact each other's worlds. But rules meant little to fate, as it always did. Aria was initially spotted by Kale while on a routine patrol outside the Dreamseer borders. She differed from the rebels he had been trained to combat. She was serene, her presence subtle but unmistakable, like a half-remembered tune. Something changed when they looked at each other. It was a thin, invisible thread that was sewing itself between their souls. Not a spark. They initially brushed it off. But every day that went by strengthened the bond. Kale started dreaming, which the Watchers were not allowed to do. He had visions of Aria's early years while he slept, including her agony, laughter, and anxieties. Aria also started to sense Kale's anger, loneliness, and hidden compassion. They could sense one another's heartbeat in their chests, even when they were separated, like a faraway echo. It frightened them both. How is this even possible? One night, standing under a starry sky, Kale inquired. Aria gazed at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and wonder. We have a soul connection. It's uncommon, old, and prohibited. The old laws said that a soul bond between a dreamseer and a watcher was an indication of imbalance, one that may lead to the destruction of both countries. Centuries ago, a similar tie ended in bloodshed and flames according to history. Cale felt cold to his core at the prospect of experiencing that fate again. They made an effort to withstand it. Cale immersed himself in his training regimen. Aria used dream rituals in an attempt to break the connection. However, love is indifferent to caution. Every second they were apart was more painful than any injury Cale had ever experienced. Additionally, Cale felt as if blades had ripped through his own body when Aria almost perished during a botched severing ceremony. He ran that night. He disobeyed the law, crossed borders, and went into Elira's prohibited woodland. He discovered her there, pallid and cold, hardly breathing. "I won't lose you," he said, holding her in his arms. Even in the event of a global fire, now complete, their relationship blazed to life, bright and dazzling. The force of it bowed trees. The stars throbbed. Ancient ruins shook somewhere. The entire planet sensed it. The leaders of both countries also did. They were pursued. He was labeled a traitor by onlookers. She was labeled a curse by dream seers. Aria and Cale, however, had lost interest. They had found truth, which was more powerful than fear. Their bond wasn't a weakness. Rather, it served as a mirror reflecting what their divided society had forgotten. That genuine love is always right, even though it might be painful, strong, and even deadly. Cale grinned at Aria as they stood on the brink of banishment, encircled by people who wished to destroy them. Allow them to arrive. "We were never meant to follow their path," Aria whispered back, her fingers intertwined with his. "We were supposed to create our own, thus, two hearts connected not just by love, but also by the kind of bond that creates legends, stepped into the unknown, the burden of the past behind them and the uncertainty of the future ahead. The storm was them. They were its inner light." Do you want this narrative to also have a visual scene? The quiet village tucked up between the hills was covered in deep shadows as the sun had just started to set. Birds, oblivious to the impending storm, sang their last melodies of the day. A deep growl sliced through the silence in the distance. Then there was a tense, strange silence. And suddenly, the ground shook. Rogue wolves barged into the village with bared teeth and fierce gaze, causing cries. They moved too quickly. Flames illuminated the sky. Huts were ripped apart, and the air was heavy with the smell of panic. Warriors rushed to protect their people. Mothers cried out for their children, but the onslaught had been too well planned and too abrupt. Cale cut through one rogue after another as he battled his way through the mayhem. His arms were covered with blood, yet he continued. His heart ached from the struggle as well as the agonizing realization that this was more than simply an attack. There was a message. Aria was where? He discovered her encircled by a group of defenders close to the village's outskirts. The symbol on her forearm was burning brighter than ever, and her eyes were glowing. It throbbed as if it were alive, responding to one of the rogues. Cale hurried over to join her. "Are you all right?" Her face was pallid, but she nodded. The village wasn't their target. They were pursuing me. Even though he had suspected it, he felt cold as she said it. They were drawn in by the mark. "I sensed it," she muttered. "I felt as though something inside of me was calling out to them, as if it had called them." Cale's thoughts were racing. None of their elders had ever recognized the mark, which had always been a mystery sign. They initially believed it to be a curse. It appeared to be something far more valuable and dangerous now. Eventually, the attack came to an end, but not without casualties. The village square was littered with bodies. The smell of blood blended with smoke as it floated through the atmosphere. In sorrow for the dead, survivors held on to one other. Once a sanctuary, the community was now a war-torn battlefield. Later that evening, Kyle and Aria waited at the edge of the forest as the flames were put out and the injured were being attended to. Even though the wind was frigid, her mark's heat was still slightly visible. According to Kyle, they weren't typical rogues. They appeared to be moving with intention, as if they were certain of the person they were searching for. Aria's voice wavered as she glanced at him. "And they will return." He didn't dispute it. This implies that we require answers. Quickly. Aria had a certain quality that went beyond the mark. Her aura, her presence was changing. Even though she had survived the assault, it was now obvious that she was more than just a young woman with an odd birthmark. She was dangerous to other people. A lighthouse. A key. To what? Nearly to herself, Aria asked out loud. Kyle's jaw was clenched as he looked at her. That is what we must ascertain. Prior to them doing so, there was mourning in the village behind them. However, two spirits were at the brink of something much bigger than either of them could have ever imagined in that peaceful time under the woods. Furthermore, the actual conflict had just started. Aria never requested authority. All she desired was tranquility, a life free from the werewolf pack's incessant growls and shifting allegiances. However, destiny had other ideas. From the pages of a lost book in the Elder's library, a voice ancient than the mountains began to murmur. Something drew Aria to the dusty room beneath the Moonstone Keep, even though she wasn't supposed to be there. The air shimmered when she opened the old book. Words in blood-red ink were revealed when the parchment cracked as if it were alive. The girl who has the Alpha's mark will either burn the packs to the ground or bring them together. Her flesh burned as she touched the page. Looking down, she saw the mark. Above her collarbone, a crescent moon surrounded by flame. They all knew the following day. On the hunt, whispers moved more quickly than wolves. Packs that thought she may be the one to put an end to decades of war were the first to show interest. The scared, who perceived her as a challenge to their authority, then arrived. The hunters, who would sooner see her killed than allow the prophecy to come to pass, came last. Her once calm community turned, become a prison. Elders argued in whispers. Warriors watched over her, but not to defend her. Uncertain of whether to fear or revere her, even her friends avoided her. The only one who dared to accompany her was Kale, a young Night Fang pack warrior. One night, as the stars overhead appeared to pause their breath, he remarked, "Prophecies are choices wrapped in mystery. Aria, you are not under the mark's power. What it turns into is up to you." Aria wasn't so sure, though. She was plagued by strange dreams in which she saw wolves tearing into one another, fire, and herself standing by herself on an ash-soaked battlefield. Even worse, like an old waking, she started to feel a tug inside her chest. Her instincts became louder and her emotions more acute. Once, a grown warrior was flung backwards by her scream alone when she felt threatened. The packs started to separate, declaring her the moon's chosen one. The Dawnclaws and Stormmanes swore allegiance. Others vowed war, including the Iron Fangs and Bloodhowlers. They accused her of swaying the balance of power and bringing calamity. She got the idea to run from Kale, As they stood at the edge of the wildlands, he said, "If you're caged, you'll never know who you are. Go. Before they impose their truth on you, discover your own." Aria disappeared into the foggy woods, pursued by adversaries and plagued by fate. But more than safety, she discovered herself in the peace and quiet of the woods. She encountered lone wolves, half-bloods, and misfits. She heard tales of suffering and conflict that the packs chose to overlook. A vision gradually emerged, one of healing the packs rather than controlling them. When she came back, it was with honesty rather than fury. She raised her voice as she stood in front of the alphas gathered under the full moon. "I didn't request Mark. However, I decided to wear it as a promise rather than a threat. You can't use me as a weapon. You won't sacrifice me. You never would have imagined that I would be the bridge." The earth shuddered. The moon blazed brightly, and Aria came to a profound realization as wolves bowed, some in fealty, others in cautious surrender. The prophecy has nothing to do with dominance or destruction. It was a matter of decision. She had also decided on togetherness. Aria had always had faith in her friends and family. She had spent her childhood in the pack, among people she knew, with whom she had eaten, shared secrets, and celebrated successes. She regarded Cameron as a confidant, a friend, and someone who would always be there for her. She had no idea that the person she least expected would betray her. It all started one chilly evening when the surrounding woodland appeared particularly silent, as if it were holding its breath. Expecting nothing more than a good hunt and a cozy evening with the pack, Aria and Cameron had set out on a typical hunt. But something she couldn't quite pinpoint had made the air feel strained and thick. After hours of hiking through the thick trees, Cameron had persuaded her to choose a track that led more into the forest. Aria hadn't given it much thought at first. Aria appreciated Cameron's knack for the wild and her ability to stay one step ahead. However, the terrain started to shift as they continued their journey. Before they reached a clearing, the trees became less in number and the air became colder and more abrasive. Everything shifted in an instant before Aria could react. A bunch of outsiders, warriors from a rival pack, surrounded them as shadows appeared from the nearby forests. Cameron took a step back, her gaze icy and far away, her lips twisted into a savage grin. She hissed, "Aria, I never meant to be your friend. You were a liability and a barrier to my advancement at all times. Without you, this pack, my pack, will be stronger." When awareness struck Aria like a blow, her heart fell. Betrayal. The way Cameron had always hovered in the background, observing her and waited for the ideal opportunity, was now quite evident. She realized that she had been a pawn in a game Cameron had been playing all along after her trust had been betrayed. Varek, the tall leader of the opposing pack, came toward Aria. As he grabbed for her, his eyes glinted with venom. "Grab her. She will be used to undermine the pack. Let's find out whether she has any authority." Even though Aria was furious, she didn't fight when they bound her hands. She refused to let them enjoy watching her get shattered. Her thoughts were racing as they pulled her through the chilly, strange woods. How did this occur? How could someone she had trusted and who was so close to her betray her so thoroughly? The air smelled of moist mud and rot as they carried her to a secret cave, a location she had never visited before. She was pushed inside a cell by Varek's men and fell to the chilly stone floor. Her heart ached from loneliness, but beyond the rage was a simmering darkness. She had never ventured to investigate this power. She had always sensed it inside of her, a dormant force that she had concealed out of fear of its intensity and the potential consequences of truly embracing it. Days went by, but Aria persisted. She was unable to. She would not allow Cameron's betrayal to be the end of her, nor would she allow her pack to fall. She focused on the inner darkness throughout those long hours, allowing it to rise and grow. It was an old power that was ingrained in her, a legacy from earlier generations that she had never really comprehended. She had been underestimated by her captors. Despite their might, they observed a young woman who was defenseless and weak. However, they were unaware that Aria was more complex than she seemed. The darkness inside her grew stronger every day, encircling her heart like a shroud of shadow. Aria felt the power surge through her body one night as the moon was high in the sky, illuminating the cave's walls with a spooky glow. As the shackles that held her began to heat up, her hands shook, the metal crackling as though the air itself had caught fire. With a furious twist of her wrists, the shackles snapped, sliding away like broken chains, and her eyes blazed a deep amber. She had freedom, and she was different now that she had authority. She had a fierce drive for vengeance and was an unstoppable force that could not be stopped. Aria's initial action was to get out of the cave and then figure out how to get back to her pack. She would confront Cameron, address the betrayal head-on, and demonstrate to everyone that Aria was not to be taken lightly. One thought came to her mind as she moved through the night, her strength energizing the air. I am no longer weak. The storm is me. Aria stood at the edge of the woodland, inhaling in the crisp, cool air as the moon hung high in the night sky, illuminating the earth with its silvery shine. With every breath, her chest rose and fell, her heart thumping with a power she had never experienced before. The victimhood she formerly wore like a thick mantle, the chains of her past, had crumbled into dust. She was now free. The girl who had previously been constrained by weakness and fear was no longer there. She was replaced with a strong, uncompromising woman. The Luna? Aria's thoughts were racing as she thought back to the years of anguish, betrayal, and misery that had formerly molded her world. As the mate of Kale, the alpha of the Silverthorn pack, she had been a prisoner herself. He had protected her like a gem for so long, yet he had never really seen her for who she was. She had been his charge, someone he needed to watch out for and provide for, but not anymore. She was not the protectorate of anyone. Aria was the one who would take the lead and provide protection. As she turned toward the center of the pack's territory, her movements were confident. She was suddenly filled with a fire that was burning as fiercely as 1,000 suns. She was vulnerable, someone who needed to be shielded from the burden of their world, and Kyle had always looked at her with a mixture of compassion and sympathy. Aria, however, was wiser. The very experiences that had attempted to shatter her had molded her. She wasn't weak. The storm was her. The elders had called an emergency meeting, and the Silverthorn pack was assembled at their clearing. They could sense a change in the mood, a strain in the air, and they knew something had happened. Kyle stood in the middle, his mouth tensed and his broad shoulders rigid. With the strength that suddenly pulsed through her veins, he hadn't anticipated her coming back in this manner. She hadn't returned for comfort or forgiveness. No, Aria had here to assert her position, not just next to him, but also next to the pack, as Luna is real. As she entered the area, she met Kale's gaze. It felt like a challenge to maintain the link that had previously held them together. The girl he had pitied was no longer her. He was equal to the woman in front of him. She would also not be forgotten. As he took in her metamorphosis, Kale's eyes briefly softened and flickered with surprise. However, she had changed in more ways than one. He had never witnessed such a fire within a person. His Luna had grown beyond his wildest expectations. "Aria," he remarked in a low, ambivalent tone, "you're back. However, you are unique." "I am," she said in a solid, steady voice. "I've changed from the person you believed me to be. I've persevered through every trial and every instance that might have destroyed me. And I rise today, not as your burden or damsel, but as your equal." Kyle took a step forward, scowling. "I never felt burdened by you. I've always wanted to keep you safe." Aria's eyes glowed, her strength increasing with each second that went by. "Kyle, no. You believed I needed protection, therefore you wanted to keep me safe. I never showed myself to you, but you will now. I will no longer represent your sympathy or need for dominance. In my own right, I am a leader. Your Luna is me. You will see me as your equal, no more, no less, if you want me on your side. If not, I'm going to leave. If I have to lead by myself, I will." With his heart thumping in his chest, Kale stood motionless. He was confronted for the first time by Aria's actual power. She wasn't a passive partner who silently trailed him. She refused to submit to his wishes since she was a force unto herself. Her attitude and the intensity of her remarks commanded respect. She was now the Luna of their pack, the woman he had always dreamed she would be. He now had an option. He continued, "I've always loved you, Aria," his voice piercing the quiet. "However, I now see that love is insufficient. I'll regard you as an equal. Instead of standing over you, I will stand alongside you." Aria nodded while maintaining a fixed gaze. "Then, Kale, we all get up. As leaders, as equals. Together, we shall mold this pack according to our own preferences." The tension between them vanished with those words, to be replaced by something more profound and powerful. Mutual respect, comprehension, and a collaboration developed during their hardships. They would lead together. They would rise together. The moon, which hung heavily in the sky and sent its pale light over the woodland where Aria and her pack had lived for as long as she could remember, caused the air to crackle with tension. Everything would be different tonight. Once friendly neighbors, the competing packs had declared war. Loyalty would be put to the test. Lives would be lost, and blood would be shed. However, the fight that would be fought on the field wasn't the real one for Aria. No, she was fighting a war inside herself from which she would never win. Her senses were keen, aware of every movement in the darkness as she stood at the edge of the pack's camp. Her heart raced from the intense conflict of feelings churning within of her, not from terror. Her veins were filled with the might of her ancestors, a force that had been both a blessing and a burden. There was always a shadow of darkness in Aria's soul, waiting to devour her. Her combat and life partner Kale came stealthily up, his wide shoulders stiff, his amber eyes searching the area with unflinching concentration. He stood at her side without a word, knowing her better than anybody else. Her senses were keen, aware of every movement in the darkness as she stood at the edge of the pack's camp. Her heart raced from the intense conflict of feelings churning within of her, not from terror. Her veins were filled with the might of her ancestors, a force that had been both a blessing and a burden. There was always a shadow of darkness in Aria's soul, waiting to devour her. Her combat and life partner, Quail, came stealthily up, his wide shoulders stiff, his amber eyes searching the area with unflinching concentration. He stood at her side without a word, knowing her better than anybody else. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered in a soothing, quiet voice. Aria gave him a quick glance, her eyes full of appreciation and sadness. "I know," she muttered, "but I have to fight my own demons before I can fight the ones outside." Her fists were tight, the claws barely showing through her human flesh. The notion of the impending struggle roused the darkness inside her, calling for her to let it go and allow the beast inside to rule. Aria, however, had always resisted that desire. Despite the lure of the shadows, she had always struggled to maintain control and keep the light of her destiny blazing brightly. She was the kind of person the prophesy had predicted would either bring the packs together or drive them apart. She was constantly reminded of the route she was meant to take by the weight of that destiny bearing down on her. Kyle grounded her by putting a hand on her shoulder. "You underestimate your strength. You are not defined by the darkness." Though she wasn't sure she believed him, she nodded. The real conflict was already raging inside her, while the war outside was just getting started. She was infused with the ancient's blood, which gave her the ability to either save or destroy everything. The beast inside her screamed for freedom, for devastation, for release. Her entire being longed to release and embrace the strength that had been long hidden. The aspect of her that had always stood up for justice and the safety of her people, however, yelled louder, imploring her to persevere. Within her, the two forces were fighting for dominance. Aria's head jerked in the direction of the cry that shattered the night air. The adversary was near. The decision she had feared most was in front of her as the war was about to start. Would she be able to resist the darkness and move into the light of her actual destiny, or would she allow it to carry her away? Determined and ferocious, the first wave of assailants came out of the trees. Aria's heart was pounding as the adrenaline shot through her. For a minute, she let herself believe in the light as she gazed at Kyle, the guy who had always been by her side. "Let's end this," she said in a stern whisper. They rushed into the battle together. Aria felt the darkness tearing at her from within as the conflict raged all around them, but she forced it away. This was her battle, her decision. Aria came to understand that she didn't have to fight this war alone as Kale fought by her side, their relationship becoming stronger with each blow. Instead of using physical force to combat the darkness, she would use her inner light, her love and optimism for the pack, Kale, and herself. "Let's end this," she said in a stern whisper. They rushed into the battle together. Aria felt the darkness tearing at her from within as the conflict raged all around them, but she forced it away. This was her battle, her decision. Aria came to understand that she didn't have to fight this war alone as Kale fought by her side, their relationship becoming stronger with each blow. Instead of using physical force to combat the darkness, she would use her inner light, her love and optimism for the pack, Kale, and herself. Subscribe now and stay tuned for more tales of courage, destiny, and inner strength. Your own story is waiting to be written.